Once upon a time, in the small village of Adolu, there lived a young and hardworking man named Isso. Isso was a farmer and palm wine tapper, but he spent most of his time working on his cocoa farm because it was more profitable than his palm wine tapping business. As the oldest son of his parents, Isso took good care of his aged parents and younger siblings, and he tried his best to provide for all their needs. Every morning, Isso would wake up early, leave for the farm, and work there until sunset. As the years passed, Isso's mother, Mrs. Bolu, realized she could no longer keep Isso to herself because he had reached a marriageable age. "Isso, my son, you have made your father and me very proud for the past few years. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened to us if we didn't have you," Mrs. Bolu said to Isso one morning while he was preparing to leave for the farm. "You are welcome, Mama. Who would have parents like you and Papa and not take care of them?" Isso smiled as he spoke. There's something I would like to discuss with you, if you don't mind," Mrs. Bolu said. "Is everything okay, Mama? Do you need money?" Isso asked in a concerned voice. "Yes, my dear. Everything is fine. And no, I do not need money," Mrs. Bolu answered. "Oh, okay. What would you like to discuss?" "I'm all ears," Isso said. "It's about you, Isso. Don't take this the wrong way, but you are old enough to start your own family. Even though I would love for you to remain here with us, it would be selfish of me to do that," Mrs. Bolu said. Immediately Mrs. Bolu said that, Isso burst into laughter. "Mama, so it's because of marriage that you came to my room this early?" Isso asked. "Yes, so this is the best time for us to talk about this, because I know you will be very tired when you return in the evening," Mrs. Bolu said. "What do you want me to do, Mama?" Isso asked. Now you're talking. I want you to bring a beautiful lady and introduce her to us. We have never seen you with any woman except those girls you work with at the farm," Mrs. Bolu said. "But Mama, you know that I'm not dating anyone. I am always busy at the farm and barely have the time to date any woman," Isso said. "So there's no one in your life?" Mrs. Bolu asked. "No, there's no one. You know me. I wouldn't lie to you if there was," Isso said. Don't worry, that's not a problem. I will personally look for a good, hard-working girl for you. You know I have eyes everywhere in this village, so just leave that to me," Mrs. Bolu said. "I trust you, Mama. Whatever choice you make, I will be satisfied with it," Isso said. "Can I leave now? I'm already running late and the other workers will get to the farm before me," he added. "Yes, you can leave now. My regards to your workers," Mrs. Bolu said. As soon as his mother told him to leave, Isso grabbed his machete, hoe and a big basket and walked briskly out of his hut. "May the gods protect you, my son. You will go and come back safely," Mrs. Bolu soliloquized. Later that day, after Mrs. Bolu had lunch with her husband, she went to one of her friends' house. Although Mrs. Bolu told Isso that she would look around the village for a good wife for him, she already had a girl in mind for her son. "Good afternoon, my friend. How are you today?" Mrs. Bolu's friend, Teji, greeted Mrs. Bolu as soon as she entered her hut. "I am fine, my sister, and you?" Mrs. Bolu asked with a wide smile. "I thank the gods. They have been taking care of me and my family," Teji, Mrs. Bolu's friend, answered. "My dear, I came here because I have good news," Mrs. Bolu said. "What's that?" Teji asked. "It's my son, Isso. He is finally ready to settle down, and he is looking for a wife," Mrs. Bolu said. "Really? Hey, that is good news. Finally, I will get to dance at my friend's son's marriage. Hey!" Teji said excitedly. "Actually, you will be dancing at our children's wedding. I have come to ask for your daughter Laya's hand in marriage." I know she will be the perfect fit for Iso because she is very beautiful and hardworking, eh? Hey. Mrs. Bolu said, "Really? You want my liar to marry Iso?" Hey! Teji asked excitedly. "So this is finally happening. Ha! Not only are we friends, but we will become in-laws soon." Teji said, "Yes, so, but that's if you say yes and liar says yes too." Mrs. Bolu said, "My dear friend, even without asking me, you should know my answer, eh? Your son is a good boy, and I see how he takes care of you and your husband. That alone shows that he will take good care of my daughter, eh? So why would I say no?" Teji said, "Our elders say that a man who takes care of his mother will surely take care of his wife. And I have seen that already," she added and burst into hearty laughter. "All right, please talk to Liar. When Iso returns from the farm, I will talk to him. Once we conclude on everything, we will come and see your family officially," Mrs. Bolu said. "I will do that, my friend. Liar is cooking in the backyard. I will tell her the good news once she is done. Make sure you tell Iso that Liar loves bushmeat and palm wine. So if he wants to win her heart faster, he knows what to do." Teji said, "My friend, you have not changed one bit, eh?" Mrs. Bolu laughed. "Don't worry, I will tell Iso what you have said." Mrs. Bolu said, "I have to go now, my friend. I will see you later, eh?" Mrs. Bolu said excitedly, "No problem, my sister. Please, talk to Iso. I will do my part." Teji said as she bid Mrs. Bolu goodbye. Because Mrs. Bolu was so excited and couldn't wait for Iso to come home in the evening, she went to his farm to tell him the good news. "Mama, why are you here? Is everything all right? Is Papa okay?" Iso asked when he saw his mother at his cocoa farm. "Calm down, Iso. Everything is fine at home. I came here because I have good news for you," Mrs. Bolu said excitedly. What is that, Mama?" Iso asked. "So, you know my friend Teji who sells oil at the market? You know she has a beautiful daughter, Liar, who is some years younger than you," Mrs. Bolu said excitedly. "Yes, I know Liar. I see her with her friends sometimes," Iso said. "I have asked for her hand in marriage." Mrs. Bolu said excitedly. "Really? What did she say?" Iso asked. "Her mother has not spoken to her yet, but I'm sure she will say yes. Teji has assured me that Liar will say yes," Mrs. Bolu said. "That would be great. I know Liar is a good girl, and she is very respectful, unlike her friends who laugh at people and call them degrading names," Iso said. "So, does that mean you like her?" Mrs. Bolu asked, and Iso blushed. "Yes, Mama, of course, I like her. But there's no need to get excited until she says yes," Iso said. "Don't worry, she will," Mrs. Bolu said. "But Mama, you should have waited for me to come home now. There was no need for you to walk all the way to the farm in this scorching sun," Iso said. "I was so excited and couldn't keep it to myself. I cannot wait to invite all my friends to your marriage," Mrs. Bolu said. "I understand, Mama. Please, go home now. When I come home later this evening, we will talk more about it," Iso said. "Okay, I will see you later this evening. That reminds me, what would you like to eat this evening? I'm in a very good mood and would like to cook you something delicious," Mrs. Bolu said. "Don't worry, Mama. There is no need to do all that," Iso said. "No, do not tell me not to worry. Today is a good day for me, so allow me to do whatever I want," Mrs. Bolu said. "All right, Mama, you can go ahead. I would like to eat okra soup and bushmeat. I think we still have bushmeat at home," Iso said. "Consider it done. By the time you are home, the food will be ready. Let me go to the market now so I can buy from my customers, Mrs. Bolu said as she left. Goodbye, Mama, Isso greeted his mother and watched as she walked away. Later that evening when Isso returned home, his mother had prepared okra soup with bushmeat and bought him fresh fufu from the market. So, Mama, what were you saying? Isso asked as he ate. His mother was sitting beside him just so she could tell him about everything. You must really like Laya, don't you? Mrs. Bolu asked. Mama, like I said earlier, I do not want to get too excited now. I'll wait until she gives us her response, Isso said. Just admit it. I cannot let my son marry someone that he doesn't like. So tell your mother the truth, Mrs. Bolu insisted. Yes, Mama, I like her. She's a very good and humble girl. Are you happy now? Isso said. Yes, I'm happy to hear that. By tomorrow morning, my friend Teji will send for me. So expect to get a response from Laya by tomorrow, Mrs. Bolu said. That's fine, Mama. But don't get too excited because I don't want your heart to be broken. If Laya says she doesn't like me, you and her mother cannot force her to marry me, Isso said. Don't say that. Be optimistic. Laya will like you. And I'm sure you are a very hardworking, handsome young man. So what's there not to like? Mrs. Bolu said. I'm just saying no, Isso said. Don't talk again. Concentrate on your food before it gets cold, Mrs. Bolu said. The following day, Isso left for his farm very early in the morning. When it was around noon, Teji, Mrs. Bolu's friend, went to Isso's parents' house. My friend, you didn't tell me you were coming. I had been expecting that one of your children would come and call me, Mrs. Bolu said when she saw Teji. My dear, I didn't want to stress you. And besides, I wanted to come and deliver the good news myself, Teji said with a broad smile. Good news? Has Laya said yes? Mrs. Bolu asked excitedly. Does she have any reason to say no? I even found out that she has liked your son Isso for a while now, Teji said. This is good news. Hey! Finally, our children will get married and we will become grandmothers, Mrs. Bolu said as she danced around her compound. Now you can tell your son to come and see us officially so we can start the marriage preparations. Once that is done, you and I will go to the market and look for the most beautiful laces to wear on their wedding day, Teji said excitedly. I will tell him. Hey, my friend, I wish you could open my heart and see how happy I am. Hey, it is every mother's desire for her son to marry a beautiful girl from a good home. And my son is about to do that, Mrs. Bolu said. Yes, I trained my Laya well, and she will bring wealth and goodness into her husband's house, Teji said. Amen. Please, what do I offer you? This calls for celebration. Hey, my son tapped palm wine last weekend, and we still have some kegs, Mrs. Bolu said excitedly. Please, bring the palm wine. I'm in a drinking mood too, Teji said, and Mrs. Bolu walked briskly into a hut. A few minutes later, Mrs. Bolu returned with a medium-sized keg of palm wine and some wooden cups. Then she poured some for her friend and some for herself. Because of Teji's company, Mrs. Bolu did not have the chance to go to Isso's farm to share the good news. So she waited for him to return in the evening. Really? Did she say yes? Isso asked excitedly when his mother broke the news to him. Yes, she did. So pick a day we will go to meet her parents officially so we can tell them our intentions and start the marriage plan. Next week Saturday is fine for me, Mama. I don't think there's any reason for me to push it further, Isso said. That's a smart choice. I will tell my friend. In the meantime, I will need some money to go to the market and buy some things. We will not be going there empty-handed, Mrs. Bolu said. Don't worry, Mama. I will give you whatever amount of money you need, Esau said. In the days that followed, Mrs. Bolu went to the market to shop for the things she needed, and when the D-Day came, they went to Lia's parents' house. Thankfully, everything went smoothly that day, and Esau announced his desire to marry Lia. About a month after Esau met Lia and her parents, they had their traditional marriage in Lia's compound. The traditional marriage was so colorful and fun. Just as Teji and Mrs. Bolu had said, they bought the most beautiful colorful laces and adorned their necks and hands with beautiful jewelry just to show that they were the mothers of the bride and groom. In addition to looking so beautiful, the two friends danced heartily and stylishly, and they ensured that there was enough food and drinks to go around. After Esau married his beautiful wife Lia, he moved out of his parents' compound and into a small compound he had bought with part of his savings. Like every newly wedded couple, Esau and Lia enjoyed each other's company and grew to love each other. Luckily for Lia, less than a month after she married Esau, she got pregnant. When Lia found out that she was pregnant, she told her husband first, and then she told her mother and her mother-in-law. The gods have answered my prayers. I prayed every day that you get pregnant early, so you can give birth and go another round. This way, you will grow with your kids. Teji, Lia's mother, said, I don't know if I want to go another round after this one. I feel sick all the time and my body has changed so much. Lia said, Don't worry. That's what every woman says until she experiences the joy of motherhood. Teji said, My dearest daughter, I pray that your pregnancy is smooth. I cannot wait to carry my grandson and have him call me Grandma. Mrs. Bolu said, Grandson? Lia and Teji asked in shock. How do you know it's a boy? Lia asked, With the way you have been behaving, it's very obvious you will give birth to a boy, Mrs. Bolu said, and Teji burst into laughter. That's the same thing they said when I was pregnant with her, and I ended up giving birth to a girl, Teji said. This one will be different. I know it, and I can feel it, Mrs. Bolu said. My dear, do not mind her. Whether you give birth to a boy or a girl, we do not mind. What's most important is that you give birth to a healthy baby. Teji said, Make sure you get enough rest and eat plenty. If you need anything, do not hesitate to let us know. She added. Because Lia had two mothers who loved her so much, she had a smooth pregnancy. All her needs were met, and her mother and mother-in-law were always by her side. They took such great care of Lia that she barely had to do anything. Almost every day, her mother Teji would go to her house to cook for her and keep her company. On some days, she would cook in her house and take the food to Lia. Thankfully, after 9 long months, Lia was finally due for delivery, but on the day she gave birth, something unexpected happened.
Abomination! She has given birth to a crystal child!
Esau overheard one of the midwives from the labor room. Crystal child? No, that cannot be. Such a thing has never happened in our lineage. Teji barged into the delivery room as soon as she overheard the midwife. A minute after Teji went in, she came out with tears rolling down her cheeks. Mama, is it true? Esau asked impatiently when Teji came out, but Teji could not speak. In the village of Adolu, crystal children were considered an abomination in the land, and they were always sacrificed and used to cleanse the village of its sins. In Adolu village, crystal children were rare births, and it was rumored that only one was born every 100 years. These children were called crystal children because of their white, pale-like skin, which is popularly known as albinism. Sadly, even if a crystal child was born to the king of Adolu, he would have no other choice but to sacrifice the baby, as it was the village's tradition. Will they come and take it? Esau asked Teji in a shaky voice, and Teji nodded slowly. No, I cannot let them take my child. No! Isso growled and ran into the labor room.
You cannot be in here!
One of the midwives yelled as soon as she saw Isso. At first, when Isso ran into the delivery room, he wanted to talk calmly to the midwives. But when he saw Laya crying and groaning in pain, his heart broke and he had a change of mind. No one must know about my son, Isso said authoritatively.
You must be joking. Don't you know that this child is an abomination and he must be buried alive just as his predecessors?
One of the midwives said. Immediately one of the midwives said that, Isso turned in her direction and then he charged towards her and strangled her to death.
Eh? Isso! What have you done? Eh?
The other two midwives gasped and asked in shock.
Nobody must know about my baby.
Isso said again. This time, he yelled louder and panted like he had been running a marathon.
Do you think because you have killed one person that we will keep quiet? Eh? We will expose you and your...
Unfortunately, before the other midwife completed her sentence, Isso strangled her with his two hands and she fell to the ground.
I will not tell anyone, oh! I will not tell anyone, oh!
The third midwife yelled as she ran out of the labor room with her two hands in the air.
Isso, what have you done?
Teji asked in shock when she ran into the labor room and saw the bodies of the midwives.
I did whatever I had to do to protect my son.
Isso said while panting.
But this is not the right way to handle this. You only made our situation worse.
Teji said in a teary voice. While Teji and Isso were talking, Mrs. Bolu, Isso's mother, walked into the labor room and immediately she saw the bodies of the midwives. She screamed in fear.
What happened?
Mrs. Bolu asked, but before anyone could answer, she looked at Laya and saw the albino child lying beside her.
Did she give birth to...
Yes, Mama. She gave birth to a crystal child and these midwives were about to expose the secret, so I killed them. Isso said.
You did what? Did you kill these women?
Mrs. Bolu asked, but Isso did not answer.
Do you know the implications of what you have done? The gods are against anyone who kills.
Mrs. Bolu said in a teary voice.
I did what had to be done. I cannot let them take my child. He is innocent and knows nothing.
Isso said in a hoarse tone.
So did you have to kill them?
Mrs. Bolu screamed and began to hit Isso on the chest with her two hands.
Do you know what you have done?
She added.
Where is the third midwife? Did you kill her too?
Mrs. Bolu asked.
No, she ran away, but she promised that she would not tell anyone.
Isso said.
Oh, Isso, why have you turned a day of happiness into a day of sorrow?
Mrs. Bolu said. By this time, Mrs. Bolu, Isso's mother, could no longer control her tears.
What do we do now?
Teji asked.
We have to take Laya and the child and leave.
Isso said.
Let's do that quickly before someone comes and sees us.
He added.
And what about the bodies of these poor women? Eh? Do you think their families will not come for us?
Mrs. Bolu asked.
Mama, please calm down. You are overreacting. We need to leave the village tonight. That's the only way they won't catch us.
Isso said.
Leave the village? What has gotten into you? How do you intend to carry your bleeding wife out of this village?
Teji said.
How do you plan to go on such a long journey with a newborn baby?
She added.
There is no way out of this. Right now, I advise that you surrender yourself. If you do, I can plead for your life.
Mrs. Bolu said.
Never. I cannot do that. You say so because he isn't your child.
Isso yelled.
Isso, I do not know what has gotten into you.
Mrs. Bolu said.
It is only a matter of time before that midwife tells the entire village what you have done. Or do you think she will keep quiet and pretend like she didn't see you strangle her fellow midwives? Eh?
She added. While Mrs. Bolu was talking, Esau heard the voices of young men outside the labor room. When he peeped through the window, Esau saw that the midwife who had escaped had gone to gather the youths of the village, and they were all with big sticks and machetes. Almost immediately, a brave youth walked into the labor room, and as soon as he saw Esau and the bodies of the midwives, he alerted the other youths. Without wasting time, the other youths charged into the room and dragged out Esau, Mrs. Bolu, and Teji.
Esau, is it true that you killed our mothers?
One of the youths asked, but Esau refused to answer. When they saw that Esau was proving stubborn, one of the angry youths hit his head with a big stick and he bled.
I will ask you this question one last time. Did you strangle our mothers? Because of that abomination you call your child?
Another youth asked. At first, Esau's intention was to stay mute, but when the angry youth called his child an abomination, he fled up and attacked him. By attacking the youth, the other youths confirmed that Esau had strangled the midwives just as the third midwife claimed, so they dragged him to the king's palace. Meanwhile, at the same time the youths were dragging Esau to the king's palace for justice, the village native doctor went to the labor room and took Esau's crystal child.
Esau, this midwife here told me that you strangled her fellow midwives with your bare hands and killed them. Why did you commit such an atrocity?
The king asked.
I did it to protect my newborn baby,
Esau answered.
Do you see why our ancestors have been sacrificing crystal children? Barely a day old, and it has pushed his father to murder 2 healthy women.
The king turned to the youths.
No, please, do not kill my baby. He knows nothing about your stupid tradition. If you want me to take him out of this village, I will do that,
Esau said in a teary voice.
I'm sorry, but we cannot let that happen. By tomorrow, our native doctor will perform the rites for this village. The crystal child has to go,
the king said.
Take him to prison. We will know what to do with him after the sacrifice has been performed,
the king ordered, and 2 of the palace guards forcefully pulled Esau to prison.
My king, please have mercy on him,
Esau's mother, Mrs. Bolu, begged the king. But the more she begged,
did he have
the
mercy
more
on
the
those midwives
angry youths yelled at her.
If you beg on your son's behalf one more time, we will do to you what he did to those women,
one of the angry youths said. Immediately Mrs. Bolu heard that. She stopped begging and walked out of the king's palace with tears rolling down her cheeks. The remainder of that evening, Esau spent it in a prison where he was neither given water nor food.
I have to escape from this place. It's the only way I can save my child,
Esau soliloquized.
You better not think of it. If you are caught trying to escape, you will be taught a lesson,
another prisoner said. But Esau refused to listen to him.
Do you think I'm joking? 2 years ago, I tried to escape and was caught. In anger, the king ordered one of his guards to shoot my left leg. And he did. Today I have only one leg because my other leg had to be amputated when the gunshot wound refused to heal,
the prisoner said.
So do you want me to abandon my baby for those lunatics?
Esau yelled back at the prisoner.
I'm sorry, but if your child is really a crystal child like I have heard, there is nothing you can do to save him,
the prisoner said.
Please stop saying that rubbish. If one more person calls my child a crystal child, I will kill that person with my bare hands,
Esau yelled.
So because a baby's skin color is different from ours, does that make it a sacrificial lamb?
Esau said, but the prisoner did not answer. The prisoner had seen that nothing he would say could change Esau's mind, so he stopped talking. That whole night, Esau could not sleep. He kept thinking of how he could escape to save his baby and ended up staying awake until morning. Around 10 a.m. the following day, Esau heard the voices of people at the king's palace, and somehow he managed to pick out the sound of his crying baby. While Esau was still thinking of a way to escape, 2 palace guards went to him and removed him from his prison.
What's going on? Esau asked in a confused tone, but the palace guards did not answer. Upon getting to the king's palace, Esau saw his wife Leah sitting on the ground with her baby. When Esau saw Leah clutching tightly to her baby with tears rolling down her cheeks, his heart shattered.
"Give the child to the father,"
the king ordered, and one of the guards took the child from Leah and gave it to Esau.
"I want you to hold your baby one last time, because this is the last time you will see him,"
the king said. Immediately Esau heard that. He held his baby tight and tried to run away, but unfortunately for him, the angry youths chased after him and caught him.
"Esau, I had said earlier that we would pass your judgment after we were done with this crystal child, but I have changed my mind. Guards, shoot him!"
The king growled. Just as the king commanded, one of the guards aimed his gun at Esau's chest and shot him in the presence of his child, wife and mother. When Mrs. Bolu saw Esau's body fall to the ground, she screamed and fainted immediately.
"It is time to perform the sacrifice,"
the native doctor said.
"We dug the grave earlier this morning, and every other thing is ready,"
the native doctor added.
"All right, you can go ahead. May the gods use this crystal baby to atone our sins and bring prosperity to our village,"
the king said. Without wasting time, the native doctor took the crystal child, who was crying uncontrollably, to his shrine. He did some incantations on the baby, and he took the baby to the small-sized grave he had dug by his shrine, and he buried the baby alive. After the sacrifice had been done, the native doctor returned to the palace, where the king and youths were still waiting for him. He announced that the ritual had been performed and that the gods had accepted their sacrifice.
"Thank you, Leah. The gods have used you to do a great thing for this village, and we will never forget you. As for your husband, we will give him a proper burial, even though he had wronged us,"
the king said. Knowing that the king could kill her and her mother if she said something out of line, Leah remained quiet until she left the king's palace. Sadly, because she could not bear the loss of her baby and husband on the same day, Leah did the unthinkable. She ingested a poisonous substance and died. As for her mother, Teji, and mother-in-law, Mrs. Bolu, after the death of their children and grandchild, the two women moved to another village where they lived for a few years before passing away. The end. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your favorite part in the comment section below. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Also, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you.